kind of throw it in. So, kind of very, very quickly, who we are. And some of you might know some of these things, but not everyone, I'm sure. But I was part of, actually, the national staff of the United Church of Christ from 1979 to 1995, actually, out of New York and then in Cleveland. And I worked in what's called the Evangelism Institutes with my wife, Marty McMain. So I've done a lot of the national stuff around that. But it was really when I retired as a chaplain at Children's Hospital in Denver, where we had moved now 15 years ago. I retired from that about 8 years ago now. And I said, where's my passion? You know, Fred Buechner had this great phrase. Elizabeth, what is it?
Oh, I should not nod so aggressively. Where the vocation is a place where your heart's deepest longing meets the world's greatest need.
Amen. You get that? That is absolutely right. So if we, you got an A already. So the deal is, and that really is the truth, isn't it? In terms of where we find our calling, and that's kind of like a clergy word, calling. But how about just our vocation? So my deepest passion became mental health. Mainly because of a son who 27 years ago was psychotic, walking the streets of New York City, and I had no idea where the hell he was and was looking for him, whatever. So that was one of his first 19 psychiatric hospitalizations in locked wards. So I've been in and out of wards. I've dealt with cops. My personal experience has been there. And then today actually happens to be, this very day, has to be my brother's, would have been his 69th birthday. Today, he would have been 69 if he had not ended his life. And then when he was 57. So, you know, what gets me in terms of dealing with issues like mental health is because of my own experience, my own deep passion, and I feel there is a deep need in the world to address it. There are a lot of needs out there. That's just one that I found myself called to. Who are you?
Gosh, I'm the power, you know. I'm Ann Weiher. I'm a person in recovery. I live with bipolar disorder. I think I've recently retired, but this is a little bit up in the air. Being adjunct professor in psychology at both Metro State College in Denver and CU Denver, rather. And I've been involved in NAMI for many years. I've been a strong advocate for other issues, but actually it was breast cancer, and when I sort of thought that was becoming a, quote, designer illness, I thought, you know, I ought to put some energy into mental health. So I've been doing that for about the last 10 or 12 years. And I'm, as many of you probably know here who live with some kind of mental health challenge or who have a family member that does, it can be a really lonely journey. And so I started a support group for family members and individuals touched by mental illness, and it was incredibly powerful for me to be with people that I could laugh about my my manias, cry with me when I was depressed, but I was searching for more. I really believed that. And one night there was a spiritual support group that was being put on at First Congregational Church, and I felt drawn to that. Craig Renenbaum was there as a guest speaker, and I went. And because I didn't know anybody there, it was really easy to give testimony to my own journey because, you know, they didn't know me, I'd probably never see them again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that really started me on a journey towards looking at the spiritual aspect of my life and how spiritual practices, spiritual support can really help one in their journey towards recovery. I've been involved in the Interfaith Network on Mental Illness and am part of the mental health ministry at our church, and also part of the UCC Mental Health Network. And I also have a daughter with a very serious eating disorder, and she also lives with bipolar disorder, and I hope I don't cry anymore. So anyway, great to be here.
Awesome. So that's part of who we are. Just a slice of it, but it's the part that really has us standing here. And if we had another 12 hours, each one of you could come up here now and tell a slice of your story and your own experience. But we won't. So I would like, we're going to ask this, and because Anne can write in a way that we can read it rather than me, going to ask, what is one question that you bring here to this workshop? Your name, where you're from, church if you wish, and say, this is the question that brings me into this room.
I'm Kathy Hanlon from Hope Central Church in Jamaica Plain, UCC Church. I want to know what exactly is WISE and how to go about maybe implementing it.
Good. So I hope by the time we finish, you'll know that we're wise and not unwise. That would be very good. That's very good. Name, question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I'm Donna Minacchio. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut, serving at Asylum Hill Church. And one of the questions I have is, what resistances did you encounter, and how did you work with that resistance or move with that resistance? I'm assuming there was some resistance. I don't know. Maybe not anybody else's church, but perhaps.
I'm Ruth Ludlow from First Church in Windsor, and I'm wondering how you start a conversation on mental health.
Okay.
I'm Dory Mojic from...
Oh, wait, you guys, you're going way too fast.
Use your power.
That's why I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Sorry.
got it. Sorry, that's all.
I'm wondering, how do we engage folks who have not been diagnosed, but may have some issues, are not aware of it? How do we engage those folks?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
My name is Bettina Del Sesto from Washington, and my question is the deep need that I have, hopefully to meet the world's deepest need, is for me to be able to tell my story, and therefore, to have the courage to tell my story, and therefore go back and bring it to my church.
Mm-hmm. To have the courage, okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hi, I'm Betty Ayers, and I'm from East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, First Congregational Church there. And I'm just wondering, I know that there are members of our congregation who have issues with children with bipolar, spouses, friends, and how do we open the door to their being able to talk about that? Because we're still deadly silent about mental issues. And then that leads to that isolation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, these are all good. These are really good.
My name is Ben Anderson. How do I deal with family members that ran away and need help, but they're not in touch?
They're not in
They are not in touch with us.
with her own.
No, they are not in touch with my family. They left a couple weeks ago and went somewhere, and we are trying to figure out what we can do to help them.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Ben.
I'm Carol Leslie. I live in Orange, Massachusetts, and one question I have is, how do we help engage pastors in being open to learning and growing and exploring this area?
Okay.
How do we help equip pastors or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm Maureen Hamilton from Meriden, Connecticut, and I'm wondering how we can move beyond just pastors and small groups of people that are sensitive to being welcoming to everyone, and have that be something that the whole congregation is seeing as a way of moving towards wholeness.
Okay. Now, when you go to these kind of workshops, people will just now talk about something else. And they say, what about those questions? But I will you're going to keep Ann and my feet to the fire on responding as much as we can to these questions, knowing full well that within this room, as I said publicly earlier, there is so much wisdom in this room, sometimes more than you realize. That is the experiential wisdom. It's the lived experience that we can learn from. So we're going to talk about just our process, and we're going to make sure that we at least begin to address some of these, or just have all of us find ways to respond. So we are going to come back to those. We're really going to do with those. And yeah, we wanted to start what this is actually what our congregation had come up with, that we took to General Synod last July. And these were kind of statements that led to the vote to become wise congregations in the UCC churches. Most people believe that mental illnesses are rare and happen to somewhere else, when in fact mental illnesses are common and widespread, with an estimated 6.1 million Americans, 1 in 4, experiencing some form of mental illness in a given year. It's across the spectrum. 1 out of 4. Have you heard that? Who hasn't heard that before? The 1 out of 4 has been affected by some kind of a mental health challenge. The severity is really more like the issues that are talking about schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression. Those could be about 1 out of 17 people have had that experience. So when we say, because when I first read that, I said, like, 1 out of 4, man, 1 out of 4 is living with, once a year has a mental illness. There's a spectrum there. I mean, when I had my situational depression, going through a divorce, that was a mental health challenge in that particular year. I wouldn't call it quite now a chronic mental illness, because it was situational for me. Anyway, just wanted, I wasn't going to say that, but go ahead, you're next.
He's taking away the power, isn't he? There continues to be strong stigma and discrimination in society against people with brain disorders in housing, employment, social relationships, including how they are treated in our churches.
And many uninformed people believe people with mental illnesses are likely to be violent, while in reality, people with mental illnesses are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators.
The public mental health system, which previously served as a safety net for people with the most severe mental illnesses, has suffered from dramatic funding cuts in the last decade, and our prisons and county jails now house more people with mental illnesses than psychiatric hospitals do.
Faith and spirituality can be an important component of recovery from mental illnesses and addictions.
A mental illness or brain disorder in the family affects not only the ill family member, it profoundly affects other family members and loved ones and the entire family structure.
So people having a diagnosable brain disorder, mental illness, and or substance abuse disorder are potentially at the highest risk for suicide. Actually, when my brother was diagnosed with major depression, which many people did not know, he was one of the 90%. I've seen up to 90% of the people who have ended their life have a diagnosable mental illness.
The church, The church is called to be a community that breaks through fear and isolation to offer love, hope, caring, and healing.
And then we do, then Jesus. We finally, the UCC got into Jesus. We got down on the resolution here. Jesus, no, I don't mean that. Jesus showed us the way to reach out to those who are ill or marginalized, to offer companionship, compassion, and support. So then the Synod voted it, actually. So that's kind of like, we want to give you a little content, but I'm into action. I just want to let you know that's what we're going to talk about. I think it was John Dewey had the great phrase. You remember this? It is easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. Now that's how I live in the world. It's I have to act my way into my thinking. Other people do it differently. I'm just saying that's only one way to do it. But my sense and my experience has been that when we begin to do some things that are changing, people begin to kind of wake up and say, hold it, this is not different. Hey, this is a change here. Something happening. What's going on? So we want to talk about something we actually have done. So we're now at First Congregational Church in Boulder, and it began. This whole process began again almost 8 years ago now, when one family in our church had 2 adult children who were living with mental illness. Both of them ended their life within a year of each other in the same way. It was really crushing. You can't believe. So the pastor turned to me and said, hey, Al, we got to do something about this. You got to do something. How are we going to respond to not only this family, but there's a whole lot of issues that are out there. If it really is about mental illness issues, that we got to really address this in some way, and it's kind of prevalent in different age groups as well. This is young adults. So what's going on here? So you got to do something about it. I said, well, I guess we could get together with some people, but. Okay, I will do it. I will do it, and I had to do it. I mean, because the minister actually is my wife, and so there's no way that I was not going to say, yeah, I can do that. I'll try something. So I just sent out a call. How you say that, especially at the Church of the Savior, where Brittany is in Washington D.C. They send out a call, or send out the invitation. I knew a couple people that might show up. And I said, if you want to, we're going to get together. We're going to talk about, what are we going to talk about mental health? We've got to talk about mental health somehow. And I think there are probably about 10 of us there. This church is about 850 members, give or take. So those 10 people came and said, well, yeah, they had, a lot of them had been experiencing issues in their own family, sometimes themselves. And so we said, we got to do something about it. We want to do some action. And so what would be the action we could do? And so we realized that there was already in place what's called an adult forum at 9 o'clock during the church year other than summer. Let's take one of those Sundays, and we're going to call it Second Sunday for mental health. And we'll just advertise. We'll find someone to talk. I don't know who's going to talk. I don't know. We'll figure out somebody. There's got to be people here to address these things. But so there's a structure already in place. And so we said, that's great. Let's choose the second Sunday. So there's a list over there of the 65 adult forums we've had since we started this whole thing. 65 people. Not one dime was spent to bring people in, from therapists to social workers to people dealing with the people in the shelter, people that are working in prison, people that are dealing with psychiatrists. We actually had some faith leaders speaking about it, and we actually have members of the church. We had a conversation, say, you all come and talk about what's your own experience, but that took time to get there. So we decided to do that, and we therefore really contextualized. Now that's a good theological word. Contextualize the issue, mental health. here is the structure, here's the form, we've got to find the people, and we'll promote it, we'll get it throughout the church newsletter. It's now in the newspaper, goes in the newspaper every Saturday before the second Sunday. So people are invited from the community, etc. Let's keep on going. So
I joined the church a bit after this time, but because I had been drawn to the church, because of the support group, and because I'd done support groups in other venues, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if the church offered a support group for people with mental health challenges and their family members and loved ones and other people who supported them. So about 6 years ago, Alan and I started the spiritual support group at First Congregational Church. And there have been a few times when we haven't had very many people, but I have to tell you, it's been a really solid group throughout most of that 6 years. We draw from all over the community. Most people that come, in fact, are not members of the church. We get people from all kinds of religious traditions, from Hindu to Jewish to Buddhist, and then people who don't really have any spiritual connection to an organized religion. So, and as this mental health ministry evolved, we became part of our Accessible to All. So the two groups met together for quite a while. But sort of in my mind and in another person's mind was percolating this idea that we have a covenant for A2A. We have a covenant for open and affirming. And I thought, why don't we have a covenant for mental health? And so partly it came out of my own experience. There have been many times in my life when I've been disabled. I remember going in and talking to my psychiatrist one time and saying to him, I don't think I can keep going like this anymore. I want to go on disability. And he kind of looked at me like, I don't think so. But anyway, that's where my mind was. But as I got more stable, I realized that I did not consider that I have a disability. I may be different, but I didn't have a disability. So to me, to have mental health be just totally under the rubric of accessible to all didn't feel right. So, and there was not, here we're hearing more, but at least in many communities, there was not much emphasis on mental health challenges from the disability community. And of course, for most of us, mental illness is invisible. So we don't look at someone and see that. So, in our church, we wanted to act more directly on mental health issues and to make it a specific part and a part that we put out to the world that this was an important issue for us. So we came up with the WISE model, which went by the wayside over there. So I'll turn it back over to Alan.
And so that's kind of where we began, therefore, to write the WISE covenant. And our goal was just to write it. We started this 8 years ago. We had no idea. What is a mental health ministry? What does that mean? We really didn't know. So we had to act our way in to figure out what that looked like. And it really began, and there's one of the resources over there, it always began with some people coming forward because of their personal experience, and they said, I'm going to make a commitment to do this. Yes, I'll show up. Yes, I can. And let's see what we can come up with. So it begins with that commitment. You have to begin there, and you have to be willing to name your experience. And I love the subtitle of Sarah's book, Breaking the Silence on Mental Illness. Breaking it is called stigma. Somebody just before I got here in Boulder, they gave me this, I used to wear about 10 of these things, but anyway, Stamp Out Stigma. And it came out of the Chinook Clubhouse model, if you know the Chinook Clubhouse, which is part of an organization for people that are living with mental illness and how they can find employment and recreation and social engagement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So But stigma is huge. So you have to really say, am I going to let people know about this or not? I mean, didn't you had to figure that out as a professor at the college?
Well, I will admit, I could get up in front of the congregation at church and talk about my story. After 16 years of teaching, I never had the courage to stand up in front of a class and say, I could say I had depression, that I'd lived with depression. I could say I was a cancer survivor, but I couldn't say I lived with bipolar disorder. And I'm somewhat ashamed of that, but let's face it, there's a lot of discrimination and a lot of stigma still out there. And I found it most strikingly from psychologists. And I can say that because I am a psychologist, but or pretend to be one. So anyway, so I mean, yeah. I was thinking about this earlier this afternoon, and I thought, it probably was pretty easy for me to get up in front of the congregation that first mental health Sunday we had, because I hardly knew anybody. So it wasn't like I was speaking to a room full of people that I'd known for 20 years, and I was suddenly revealing myself. So.
Yeah. And that does take that. You got to kind of suck it up and say, am I going to say this or not? And some places, you're not going to do it because that is not a safe place to do it. So the question is, how do you make this space safe enough so that people can tell that story? When Anne got up, that was not 9 years ago. I mean, that's more like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It took us years, got it? YEARS, until we got to the point where we could have a mental health Sunday at which a person, and we have now done several every year, when a person can up and tell part of their story in the congregation. So how do you create that safe place? How do you create that in your own congregation? And some of the tips that we have, I think. What, okay?
Yeah, I was hoping she was okay.
Okay, all right, good. So, how do you create that? Number one, it really is the pastor. It's got to be the pastor who's willing, in a pastoral prayer even, just to include persons who are living with chronic mental illnesses. So Marty, who is my wife, who was the senior minister there, she told me to do something, get the committee, so I told her something. Well, it didn't quite work that way, but I said, it's good for you to kind of name these things in the pastoral prayers. And once in a while, I'm not talking about the laundry list that we all, every day we bring forth in terms of Holy God, we're dealing with this. Every Sunday we know that, but we have in prayer, we had talk about people living with schizophrenia, major depression, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, naming those absolute situations publicly, just in prayer, says something to the whole congregation because you've heard it, right? Doesn't that make sense? Sure. So that's number one. Begin to saying it. People will say like, God, I think that's really what my nephew's going through. I think my nephew is dealing with schizophrenia. I've just heard about that, but I never thought about saying anything about that in the church. What the church say anything about that anyway? I mean, the church is just, they don't know what's going on in terms of brain chemistry and what's going on with disorder in one brain. So, but yeah. So how do you help clergy get to that point where they're able to use those words, because we all need, I need, I'm clergy myself or retired, to have some understanding. And that's hard. You know as well as I. I mean, those of you who are pastors here, how many things you need to know. Another webinar, another seminar, another, oh my God, a Widening the Welcome Conference. Geez, I got to take all that time out. I'm preaching all this Sunday. So anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So it takes some time to get to that point. But again, it was because something happens in the dynamic of what a clergy is going through, however he is experiencing the mental health situations that are coming up in their own congregation, maybe is taking mental health first aid. Is there anybody here that has been to the mental health first aid? Okay, some people. That is a national program. It's only 8 hours, and it is from beginning to end in terms of dealing with issues around mental health issues, and it's mostly free. It came out of Australia, went through Maryland, and is now national, and even the president talked about it and blessed it. So it's the mental health first aid. And even if your congregation said, okay, what we want to do is we're going to host it in our church. Because we have space, we have room. We have at least one fellowship room where we got one nice big room where we can host things. So let's have them and use, and you go out to the local mental health center and say, we have space here, and maybe people don't want to go to the mental health center to deal with mental health because it's still a stigma. But maybe they can come to the church. And so we bring the program to the church, and the church just say, free space for you. And so all of a sudden you look in the bulletin and say, like, oh, mental health first aid, what's that? Maybe I could sign up. Or you put it in your newsletter, whatever it is. So all of a sudden, there's little bubbles, little ripples that people are saying, that's interesting. Because you know as well as I, there's not one thing that's going to make it happen for the place that's going to be safe enough. It's obviously in worship in some ways. It's got to be in terms of the use of space, which is really a good way to approach it as well. So I'm going off on all these things. But anyway, so
You are, and let me say something before he hogs the stage again. I will be walking back to Boulder. But
No.
I know this is going to be serious. I cannot tell you how it gladdens my heart to hear the minister say in the prayers to the people that they are praying for those of us who live with serious mental illness and family members. I mean, somebody asked about what's one thing you can take back. I mean, to me, that, I can't tell you how much that means to me. And I'm obviously speaking from my heart, not just being a professor up here. So, but anyway, okay, now you can.
No, that's very true. I think that's very, very true. So I think what we'd like to do, again, there are resources over there. There really are 10 steps. I love all things. I like 10 steps, 12 steps, whatever it is. Because whether that's figurative or literal, to take a step is an action plan. I'm going to do something. So it's just making the commitment, educating yourself, get a buy-in from the clergy or the board, get the little team together. What does it say in the Bible? 2 out of 3? Two or three people gathered in the name of Jesus. Jesus is there. That's where the Spirit is there. We're not talking about, we got to get at least 15, 20, 30 people to really get this. No, not at all. Decide what you want to offer. We just started with, let's do some adult forums, just for education, just using the words. And then let's find out people around in town. Maybe then people can actually come in and speak and talk about some of these things. And all of a sudden, as I said, we have 65 things that happen with different people. And then you get what are the resources. As you get into it more and more, you say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that the mental health center really wanted to have some programs in the church, not just in their center. So we began to develop that resources, reaching out with them. So let's whys that we're getting there. So the wise covenant, the welcoming. There are just a whole lot of things, obviously, that you're already doing and can do in terms of making an environment that is welcoming to people, an environment. And obviously, it's awareness. That's what it is. So to be aware of issues around mental health challenges means that you can be cognizant and you can actually notice and see what your own ignorance or naivete is around these kind of issues. So education is really very important. and that really means kind of examining our own preconceived notions about what mental illness might be, the fear that might be in some, and there's another workshop going on right here that Matt Cribbins is talking about. He's the minister here in Newtown, Connecticut, when the Sandy Hook massacre, killing happened with the kindergarten kids. What do you think that's like for that congregation to deal with trauma? Ooh. He spent years since the Sandy Hook to kind of begin to address that and help to face the fears that something like that's close to them, to then be able to say, we want to talk about mental health. We really want to talk about these things, because it's not by percentage of people, or only 4% of the people who actually have done a violent crime have some kind of a diagnosable mental illness. 4%.
I'm having trouble hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Your voice, but
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
followed it.
I'm tired. No, I'm not very tired. Yeah. Very good. Please. Thank you for telling me. So the call to action again is how do you tell their stories? That's why I have the Mental Health Sunday. Third Sunday in May. It's in the UCC calendar. It's called Mental Health Sunday. There are resources with the UCC Blogspot. It's on the resources, our website, and the resources of what are available for litanies, sermon suggestions, et cetera, for pulling a Mental Health Sunday together. You could even use that. We did the weaving. Those are here last night for the opening worship. We had that weaving thing. And by the way, it's going out to the highest bidder if you want to take it home, because I'm not taking it back to Boulder. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to give it away to whoever would really like it. Where to put it. So part of it again is obviously in terms of what our welcoming will be. You want to talk some more about what comes next?
Inclusion is supposed to be what comes next. I think we've talked about over and over this conference time the power of personal stories, and so I won't talk more about that. The other thing that we have provided seed money for is called the Caring Clergy Project, and these are short videos. They're aimed at clergy, but anybody can look at them. But to educate clergy on such things as, how do you make a referral? Where do I get that list? How do I vet people to make sure they're going to be a good, appropriate person? And how do I follow up? And then there are videos on suicide and how to deal with that, how to talk about it in your congregation, how to provide support. And then a video on common disorders, and then how your congregation can help. So, if you look at the Wise Covenant, you'll see that there are lots of things that one ought to do. And I guess I want to just reiterate that we're on a journey with this. And I'm sure some of you have done things that we haven't done, but that we're all trying to really make the world a better place for those who live with mental illness. So, and S talks about being supportive. How do we support people? Now, I've already talked about the support group and prayers to the people. We also have a soup kitchen, which serves many people who live with mental illness. We also know, aside from the jails and the prisons, housing our mentally ill individuals. And I have to say that my daughter, about a year ago, was in a psychotic state, wandering the streets of Boulder. I didn't know where she was. She got picked up by the police and spent 3 months in jail for stealing something that was worth $50. So, and if it hadn't been for Alan, I could only go see her once a week. But Alan, as a clergy person, could go see her as often as he did, and he almost went every day. But, it's a horrible feeling to know that you're so helpless. I see somebody shaking their head. I could have bonded her out, that wasn't the problem. The problem was she was still psychotic. And the reason she ended up where she was she'd been in a hospital. They transported her back to Boulder in the middle of the day in December with a t-shirt on, left her at a homeless shelter at noon. Our homeless shelter opens at 5 o'clock. She's wandering around, and the police arrest her because she was trying to get in to somebody's apartment because she was cold, and then she also had taken this package in her, psychotic state, not knowing where to go and what to do. And so she was still psychotic when her bond hearing came up. And I was afraid she'd go back to that awful place, the psychiatric hospital where she was. And I thought, I can't deal with her at home. I'd already had to call the police on her, which is just heartbreaking to have to do that. And I was very fortunate. I'm really off track, but anyway.
What track are we on?
I don't know what track we're on. This is a speech I gave earlier this year, but anyway, that CIT, Crisis Intervention Trained Policemen, came, and they were wonderful with her. But obviously that night they picked her up, and I wasn't with her. Bad news. But so people are in jail and in prison, and they're not in hospitals. So that was somewhere in my notes. So yeah, and there's also a lack of real practical support. I don't know how housing is in your communities, but at least in ours, it's very, very difficult to find affordable housing and find supported housing for people. And find jobs, meaningful jobs. I feel very blessed. My daughter is now working in I can't think of the name. I know the name of the company. It's called Infinitely Simple. It's not quite, it's an enterprise, social enterprise. And she only works about 6 hours a week, but she feels so good. She comes home and she's on top of the world because she's making a difference in the world. And that's what the whole Clubhouse movement has been about. But as funding sources have dried up, those have kind of gone sometimes by the wayside. And in case you didn't know it, I'm an advocate, so get off my soapbox. Huh?
I said we never could have figured
I
that out.
know. I had this script here. I was supposed to be good, but anyway. So anyway, now you're back to E, engaged.
So we're on E now, the engagement. And there are a whole, we kind of mentioned some of them as we go. And obviously letting organizations use your church. I mean, we're a nonprofit organization, right? Shouldn't we be offering our space for others? I mean, it's like, why else would we be there as a church unless we actually are saying we are serving others? That's engagement means, so who needs to come in to use the space, who might be dealing with mental health challenge, addictions, trauma, at no cost. So talk to your stewardship and finance people about that one. And engagement, again, is we want to put as much as we can on the newspaper. Now, the local newspaper does have what's called the religious briefs every Saturday, really small, but it's something, and it's in there, and people actually come to these groups. Our support group that we do, I said Ann didn't mention, we've done it 6 years, twice a month, 12 months a year. So we're up to 125 and counting. That the two of us plus one other person and 3 other backups. So we have a bunch of facilitators to do this. But we put that in the newspaper so people can be engaged through that. I talked about mental health first aid. Obviously, I believe in NAMI. I absolutely, when I first kind of figured out after my son's probably his 7th to 10th hospitalization. I said, I need to know more about what brain chemistry is all about. So how many people have taken the family to family? Yeah, family to family is those of us who have a family member who has lived or is living with a mental illness. It's a great free program. Family to family, NAMI. NAMI is out there in the exhibitor booth. If you haven't talked to them, talk to them. They also have one, In Our Own Voice, IOOV, In Our Own Voice. It is a well-crafted video. It's free presentation. Persons tell part of their story. People can read what's on the video. It's fantastic. Pathways to Promise. Only one other that I think, to me, really the top ones is mentalhealthministries.com, and that's through Susan Craig Schroeder in California. Great program itself. So, and we're beginning now, to explore some of the bills that are going into Congress right now, like the Murphy bill. If you've heard about the Murphy bill, he was the one whose son came at him with a knife. He was a congressman, right? And then took the knife and ended his own life. So the father is the one who's pulling this bill together. It's a great bill. It's gone helping families dealing with mental health issues. And but some real controversial stuff in there, like involuntary commitment. Huge. Number 2 is all the letting people know about how can I get in touch with the psychiatrist or the facility where my loved one is staying, and when HIPAA will not allow me to get that information. Well, there's some changes that's in this bill as well. There are probably other things, as you're much more conversant about those, but we're trying to engage in terms of really looking at what's happening across the country as well through legislation.
And, in this bill and some others that are before Congress, there is additional funding, not only for community and community mental health groups, but also for research. I was talking to a psychiatrist last night, whom I don't see in the audience, but if I've missed you, I'm sorry, Ken.
Ken? Is Ken here?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, he said, we've made a lot of progress with psychotropic drugs and medication, and that's true. But I think, for me at least, it's only part of the story. And so, we need funding in other areas. We need housing and all those things that I was on my soapbox about a few minutes ago. So, anyway, what we'd like you to, well, first of all, have we answered your questions?
No, we've not. Well, let's see where we are. What is WISE? How to implement? We got a couple steps, right? Anything else that needs to be addressed in that? How to do it? Well, it's just, I think one person was asking that question because it's like, who do I talk to? Well, number 1, you got to kind of buck up and say, okay, I'm going to name the fact that whenever I've written about or talked about my son, who's 45 and he's thriving, he is funny, he's witty, he's a cyclist in New York City and a personal fitness trainer. So I have to give him. He tells me what I can see and say and what I cannot say. So number 1, that's the confidentiality is huge and really, really important. Actually, the first time that the 2 of us did a presentation together was in Chapel Hill called Faith Connections. That's North Carolina. At some point last year, actually. So I flew him out of New York. I flew from Boulder. We met in Chapel Hill. And the first time after 27 years that the 2 of us stood together in front of this crowd that we had no idea who they were, and we told our perspective of what it's been like for me as a dad to try to deal with the bipolar substance abuse behaviors of my son. And it has been hopeless and hopeful. It's been helpless and helpful. It's all that stuff, as you know as well as I. but to be able to share that, and then for him to tell his story. As he said, okay, and now here comes the real story after I sat down. Then he really told the story. Very witty, very funny. He was really, really great. So where was I going with that? Anyway, you find yourself to be able to say it and find somebody who's willing to, I'm with you. I'm with you. Even if they have that experience, they might have carved out within their own heart enough compassion to say, I will walk with you. Let's see what we can do. 2 or 3 people. That's some steps there.
Alan,
Yes.
at what point in that process did you all say, we are ready to officially declare
Great.
that we are a Wise Covenant Church?
Pam, that's a great question. We were going to give you all these papers. Here are the 12 steps for starting a wise covenant in the church. And so for us, it began, again, we started this almost 9 years ago.
Right.
And so it took us time, as I'm talking about this, to get to the point where we said, okay, as you were saying, Ann, that we had that A2A in terms of inclusion of all, and especially around physical disabilities, but the language was not really broad enough to include mental health challenges. So where did we come in that? Because we voted last October, actually, almost a year.
What we did was, a couple of us wrote the covenant. And then we gave it to others, the senior pastor, the associate pastor, Alan, and other people to edit. And then, before we brought it to the congregation, we went and met with all the various church councils in our church and got a buy-in from them. And then myself and one other person stood up in front of the congregation and said, we think you should vote on this. We were a little bit more.
How about this?
Yes.
How about this?
You were there?
Yes.
What would you say? What happened?
That would disability month.
Yes.
How about that when you voted on that covenant?
It just happened,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
So we knew when to do it, Pam, when it was, when it's in the right time. And we tested the waters enough, and we had enough experience to say, we're talking about things that are happening already. We're not saying anything brand new. We're saying we want you to name that we are going to be in this process. There are still so many things. I mean, we have one of the buildings that our church owns is where the day shelter is for persons that are homeless. And they hang out in the parking lot throughout the whole day, right next to we're downtown Boulder.
Yes.
And the question is, how are we really interacting with these folks? And especially those who come to the soup kitchen, which is once a month. And do we have stewards, people that are trained to go and sit down with and engage in conversation, offer hospitality? We're not there yet. I mean, it's all process.
Okay.
Robin.
I think it's evident there's a lot of interest in this because we had to keep getting more chairs. And I know in my church, somebody went to General Synod and learned about this. Let's do this. I know this came out of your church, but has this been approved like A2A and open and affirming in the wider church so we can all, if we go through these steps, take it on in our own church?
What do you think about that, Sarah?
Well, that's what the Synod resolution.
But what was the Synod? Yeah, tell me about that.
Was the WISE resolution. And so your mental health network is now in the process of creating a toolkit for congregations to go through the WISE process and create a covenant and create a network of WISE congregations in the UCC.
So if I took this home,
Yes.
and a little group, they're already interested, and I know there's many steps, but let's say we wanted to do it and brought it forward, could we, at this point, in terms of General Synod, approve it?
Here's what it is.
Tell us.
A written covenant puts your congregation on record that it is truly in the process of becoming a wise congregation. The UCC Mental Health Network, which is recognized, and now you know us as well, will not certify a church as wise without a written statement. A covenant will show people who live with mental health challenges that your church strives to be a safe spiritual home for them and their families. Use language that is authentic and reflects your congregation's values. You'll find samples of the WISE Covenant on the website, and then we have copies here of the one from.
What is that you're reading from? What were you reading from right there?
Oh, that is our 12 steps to become, and the
what
copies
you
of
just
it.
read about what you were just reading from.
Yeah, that's called 12 Steps to Become a Wise Congregation. Yeah, we were going to put all this stuff on your chairs, but we thought like, no, I thought it much better to look at Ann than look at all the papers. So that was good.
Nikki?
Yes.
So your congregation already had the A2A covenant, I heard. So for a congregation, so
Just a little louder.
their church already had the A2A covenant. So for a church who does not have the A2A covenant, is there recommendations to do one first and then the other? Or does it depend on what the interest of that particular congregation is?
That is a great question. I wish I had a better answer. No, I think partly because, and I know I was where was I? Another group last night or something. And this is a congregation that's been working on O&A, and they said, okay, when we're doing the O&A, we want to also partner with and be part of issues around being inclusive of persons of all physical disabilities, as well as those that are dealing with mental health challenges. So we'll kind of put that all together. And so I thought that's great. That's a great way to say, because we're all seeking to be inclusive, but also embracing in ways of the gifts, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but the question is there really a focus on it? It's one thing to vote all that and say, okay, now, but how are you going to act into that? What would that look like? And many of our congregations I know, out of the 5,000 plus UCC churches, I think the average membership is maybe 150 membership. So we're not talking about, so a lot of congregations are like, my God, how can I do all these? You have to do the O&A, and then also do an A2A, and then mental health. What are all these things? To me, these are just value statements. This is not like, okay, now we have to, it's a value statement. Say like, yeah, we are in process of being accessible to all. We're in the process of being a wise congregation. So I think there needs to be some focus, and a group that focuses on that in some way. Start here or there, but go with where that energy is now. Because I think that however God is working in you and your congregation, it is that it will yield what you need. Peggy.
I was just we've talked about this for years.
Sure.
And the common value is inclusion in all of the processes. I would recommend you go with where the passion is.
I agree.
Because the passion is what's going to carry it. And one generally will lead to another once you really get inclusion.
The First Congregational Church in Boulder, they became open and affirming, I think it's now 28 years ago. And 28 years ago. And really not up until the last 15 years that has been embodied. Yeah. Really have embodied it. So it's a nice thing to vote it, but it was like, there was not a lot of action. But since we've done the O&A Sundays, we've done a lot of stuff around the Pride Festival. We've been part of the Pride Festival program, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you have to act your way into it. And when the time is right, the Spirit will move. Anyway, so resistance. Was there any resistance? I'm trying to thinking about the resistance. Who asked that question? That's a very good question. Yeah, because I think, what would be the resistance? Number one, there was no money that we were asking for, so there's no resistance in terms of that. They made a space for the mental health ministry on the church council, which is the people of all the different boards and committees. So there was no resistance for doing that. maybe we haven't have enough bite yet to have resistance. So I wonder, that's sometimes that I'm much more of a person who's a builder up and encourager. I'm an encourager. You know what encourage means? Encourage, encour, to provide heart. That's what I think needs to happen. Maybe we haven't been prophetic enough to find resistance yet. Maybe.
The only thing I would say where I have found some resistance or say lack of participation is we always get a team for the NAMI walk. But last year, I think there were 4 of us. So, maybe we haven't made enough of an impact on the life of the church yet to really feel, get the resistance that you're wondering about.
Yes?
I was thinking a lot about silence, where I wondered where resistance may not be visible because you don't know who's struggling and not yet. So the only thing I think of is people maybe not coming or not sharing that they're feeling this way. And just thinking about, do you all do drives or do you do these encouragements to come and be vulnerable? Because that could be dangerous for somebody if they're still working through being honest with themselves, or just how you maybe handle the quieter moments that people.
I guess that was where I was getting from the point about the NAMI walk. I mean, I don't know, we don't do anything for, say, Race for the Cure. We don't get a team together, so I can't compare the two. But I suspect if we were having some walk for cancer or even Alzheimer's, we'd get a whole lot more people than we did. Yeah.
One of the things that we have encountered is that, as I said yesterday when I stood up and named that my daughter had bipolar disease and at that point was in lithium toxicity and I needed prayers, people came out of the woodwork to tell me about their children or relatives who had it. But at the same time, our church participates in what we call an interfaith dinner, where poor people and or homeless people come, and once a month that dinner is held at our church. And there isn't, or often isn't, quite the same understanding for those in that group who are mentally ill as there is when I speak about my daughter and someone else speaks about their kid who needs it. So it's an educational process where we have to remind them, many of these people are in the position they're in because of mental illness, and they need us to love them.
I think one of the resistances and one of the things I've heard is concern that, and you've done a lot of preparatory work and educational work and inclusive work before you did the covenant. One of the things I hear is, if we have those people in our congregation, are they going to be disrupting our worship and stuff like that? So we don't want to say that we're welcoming of people with mental illness if they're going to act out in worship and stuff like that.
P.S. They're already in your church.
Yeah.
I know, P.S. Right. So the question is, that's a great comment in terms of the resistance is seen in silence, or those people, rather than I'm talking about the person next to me.
Yeah.
And we don't really know because we haven't found a safe enough place to say I can name it. My vulnerability is all right here at the feet of God's grace. I mean, is that, yeah, I mean, you could preach that. You could preach that. I mean, that's really what it is. You all come. Isn't Jesus' arms open? Like a babe, like a child, come into my lap. Anyway, yeah, I think that's true.
We had that experience in one of my congregations that I was in, and how we dealt with it was we had a person that was comfortable sitting with that person, and he would always answer our pastor's rhetorical questions. But I would just lean next to him and say, "Do you know you're thinking out loud?" And he'd be like, "Oh, yeah." Mm-hmm. And that helped him be quiet.
One of the greatest, that's terrific, Kathy, that if you haven't come across the Pathways to Promise website, and one of the training modules is by Craig Renenbaum, which some of you might know and probably have met him, and he does a companionship training on that website which is doing exactly what you said, Kathy. So you're paying attention to those who seem to be apparently dealing with an issue that might be homelessness or voices or whatever, and they have someone trained to sit with them and to engage in that way. Again, we're not there. We're still in process ourselves. That's great, though. So that's some of the ways to overcome resistance, I think.
I got a family member right now that is in jail. And it's very hard for me to talk about, but he is in jail because he killed someone. He killed his fiancée. On a weekend where he could not get any help. I mean, he wanted to reach out and get some help, but the mental health people were not available. And he went home and killed her, and now he's in prison for 17 years.
Yeah.
And I as a consumer and a advocate, question in my mind is, why don't we have mental illness help in a prison? Because they don't get anything in prison.
That's very, very, very true. I know that. Very true. So we're shifting right now. I just decided we're going to shift something. Okay, you ready? We'll come back to this, maybe. So my suggestion is, get with 2 other people. Where's your situation? What are 2 steps, or maybe in 1, that you might want to take, need to take, in terms of what we've talked about so far? So thought, yes, just turn with two other people, just 3 of you if you can. You say like, okay, this is where I am, and this is what I need to do. Here's one thing, with an idea.
My question is, I don't know. I'm wondering if but I have already Not in crisis, to frame it that way. It's always challenge to make things that I minister well, I was a member before. I was actually maybe in 2000 been through an interim pastor already. When I was hired, we had a
I think we would die.
Came back and I just
See if I can get everybody on board. Huh?
yes.
No, big I. There I.
us together. Weave us together in unity and love. Weave us together. Weave us together, together in love. All right. So we're coming to the time here. So popcorn time. Popcorn means one idea, one step that you heard or you shared. One thing. Just somebody start.
Sunday in May.
Sunday in May.
Sunday in May.
Talk to the pastor who's already shown some openness to this.
Talk to the pastor who's already shown some openness. I don't have to repeat it unless you can't hear it.
When the pastor asks at prayer time, who you want to pray for, say, let's pray for the mentally ill.
Persons that are have mental illness. Again, we all have learned the whole first person thing. Yeah, so it's my son is a bipolar person. No, he's a person who has bipolar disorder. But that's great. That again, it's all about education. That's huge. But it's huge.
Find one or two colleagues in your church to be with you as you start the path. So it's not just you, there's bound to be one more, or maybe two or more.
I agree, at least one or two.
The people who aren't able to share or can't for whatever reason, interviewing them and sharing the story for them.
I'm sorry, my hearing aid is still working, but I quite get it.
Interviewing people in the church that maybe have are struggling with mental illness. If they don't want to share or can't share, you interview them and you share it as a leader or do a video of your interview or something where you build compassion through your being the storyteller.
Fantastic. And especially if a person really wants the story to go out and you know that the power of the story is also going to be transformative for the congregation. That's great.
I think in our own voice is another possibility of bringing people in to testify, to tell a story, represent themselves as persons with mental illnesses. And I was thinking, shoot, if you can't find in our own voice people in community, go to local depression and bipolar support alliance. You got lots of rowdy people there who are willing to talk.
That's good. That's a very good.
Particularly on the upside.
Right. That's very true. Very true.
Anything else?
One step. What'd you hear? One you can share. Yes.
I'm going to call, or because I'm from Connecticut, I'm going to talk to the people at the table outside NAMI and see if we can offer a space for them.
Awesome.
Mental health first aid.
Yeah. Actually, the president of the national board of NAMI was to have been here this morning, but it's her son who's dealing with a mental illness crisis, so she had to go be with him. Otherwise, she would have been here. So, I mean, in other words, yeah, there's a great connection in terms of that. Working together.
Can I say something else about mental health first aid? It is a regimented program, but we have gotten together a team of 4 people, and before or sometimes before lunch, either very early in the morning or when people prefer it later in the day, we come in and do a half-hour program about the role of spirituality in recovery from mental health challenges. So, it depends on how open your mental health first aid providers are, but we've been very successful.
If you go to the website, mentalhealthfirstaid.org, there's an enormous amount of material there about the program itself, as well as a list of teachers by geography.
Okay.
Around the country.
Yes.
And Ann is actually testifying to the fact that when I went through the course, and it was absolutely zero sense of the spirituality as a component in one's recovery, which is huge. People have said that since I've been here. A therapist was here and said, we're not talking about spirituality at all, but that is where some people find one of their resources in order to manage, to cope, to thrive, to go on. So if anybody wants, send me an email and I will send you the presentation, the half-an-hour presentation we do. Of course, I speak, wouldn't you know? Anne speaks as a person who is living with mental illness, a psychiatrist who talks about the 4 components of what a kind of spiritual foundation might be. And the 4th person talks about the mental health called FICA. Who knows FICA? You know what FICA is? I know you can say taxes, weren't you? Yeah, I know you say taxes. FICA actually is a way to talk about, and I used to carry this thing around here somewhere.
How do we find
Here
your
it is.
email address?
We've got cards
Yeah, we
at the
have
back.
cards over there, you can get that.
And we've got also more material, but probably not enough for as many might want it, but if you email us, one of us will get some material
Well,
to
that's
us.
the
Are
thing.
your materials all up on the Dropbox? I know Widening the Welcome sent out an email saying all presenter materials will be on this Dropbox. Is that
Yes.
true?
Oh, yes, this
Awesome.
we'll pop this on, yeah. I'll just put all the resources there. Yeah,
Great.
they'll be on, they'll
That'd
be
be
on that
easier.
too. Yeah, somebody had another.
So what's FICA?
Yeah, good, thank you. I knew it was going somewhere, and I lost. My mind wandered. FICA, what is your faith? Faith. What is the spiritual component of your life? FI is what inclusive. Are you included in a
Community.
right? Isn't that it? The
Are you
inclusive-
part of a community? No, that's C.
No. That's where I had that. FICA. I thought I had this thing. Anyway, C is community, and then A is what kind of action are you going to take in order to deal with the situation you're dealing with.
Information.
I will send it to you again. I should have this thing here. I used to have it. Oh, well.
Does I stand for information?
It might. Good
I
guess.
knew
It is.
the lost was found. Okay. FICA is faith, belief, meaning. I is, of course, what is there importance and an influence of your faith in your life? Is it important? Is C, are you part of a community of social network? And A, are you going to address this? What is the action you're going to take? FICA. And there's a nice little card, and it's $1 out of, I think it's out in Washington. But it is written by Christina Polchulski, an MD. Great little thing. I'll hold it here if you want to look at it. There's a whole paragraph even. But that's FICA. What another step? Any other step? How are we doing? Wow.
My step is to sound a call in the Church of the Savior.
Right.
And,
Yes.
So now, and I talked about courage, and while we were speaking, I thought of a person who I'm going to see anyway on Tuesday, and I'm going to start the call.
All right. That's how it begins. That's how it begins. That's a step. That's a step. Anybody else? Because you probably know the story that one of the issues when we say like, well, I'll take a step, but mine is so small. I didn't want to say about it. I didn't want to say anything about it. So when I went to my first Narcotics Anonymous group, like an Al-Anon one for my son dealing with narcotic stuff, I walked in and here's this sign. It says, you did not cause it, you cannot cure it, and you cannot control it, the big 3 C's. And I thought, oh my God, that was great for me to hear. That was very, very good. But people were telling these amazing stories. Well, you know, my son went through all this kind of stuff and stuff. Well, no, my son was, so this woman got up and says, excuse me, I just want to make sure we're not into comparative painology. And it was awesome. It was awesome. So your story is your story. You know? I mean, you know, a person who went through Katrina. And this is, you have to suspend your theological thinking at this particular point, if you will. This guy, you know, went through Katrina, but after that he became very old and he died, he went to heaven. And so he's in heaven, and so he said, what you need to do, you're going to get in front of everybody who's here, and you're going to tell us about your experience. Well, I said, well, I mean, you know, we all know Katrina. It was devastating. So he began telling his story. So, but just want to let you know, when you're telling the story, Noah is going to be in the audience. And so when any of us, we tell our story, it is our story, you know, and it has its own truth, its own integrity, its own authenticity. So don't do the comparative thing. I'm telling this to you because I need to hear it. And it really is 4:30, so we're so glad that you're here. There are resources here. Stay in touch.